Welcome everybody to our panel on challenges and opportunities in a virtual world. So as I said before, if you haven't yet, please do put your name and your organization and your location in the chat so we can get to know each other and know who's in the room. I'm Karen Romano. I'm the Activity Director for IDEAL, and I'll be moderating this session. So before we get started, we all need to select a language. If you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a globe icon, and it should say interpretation. And you'll need to select a language, either select English, French, or Spanish. I'm sorry we can't offer more languages, but hopefully that will do. So please select English, French, or Spanish. If you've chosen French or Spanish, you can mute the original audio. The audio is going to be in English. So you can mute it, or you can choose to keep it on in the background at a lower volume. It's up to you. Okay, and if you have any trouble with that, just chat anyone with the word IDEAL next to their name, and we can help you out. So let's get started. So we are going to be starting today's session with discussion among the panelists who have joined us, and then we'll be opening up for Q&A. Throughout, if you want to ask questions, feel free. We will be holding them. We'll decide. We'll see. We might integrate some. We might hold some. It just depends. But please do use the Q&A box. Don't use the chat. We're not going to be monitoring for questions. Please use the Q&A box. It makes it much easier for us to manage the question and answers. So in today's session, we're going to be exploring three themes. One is staff and participant well-being in an increasingly hyper-connected working environment. The second is ensuring that no one is left behind as integration of technology into our work accelerates. And the third is the future of digital solutions in our field. So let's get started by introducing our panelists. So first, we have Claudine Lim, and she is the manager for the Principles for Digital Development at the United Nations Foundation's Digital Impact Alliance team, where she shapes and delivers digital principles strategies and supports the digital development community's capacity through the adoption of good practice and collaboration. Welcome, Claudine. Next, we have Jesus Melendez Vicente, who is a humanitarian data and technology senior advisor and program director with more than 20 years of experience in both private sector, for example, Telefonica, Orange, and also INGOs such as Mercy Corps and IREX across Europe, Middle East, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Jesus is currently Senior Technical Advisor for Data and Digital Development at IREX. And next we have Priscilla Chomba Kinywa, who is a digital transformation strategist with experience in technology and innovation, working with communities in over 50 countries on 5 continents. She spent 19 years working with, among others, World Food Programme, UNICEF, Danish Church Aid, and she's currently the head of digital and technology at ActionAid International. And next we have Kim Cook, who is an experienced technology, innovation, and humanitarian expert with more than 25 years of experience in the identification and implementation of innovative solutions for problems in climate change, humanitarian response, sustainable development, intelligence, and national security. So we have quite a rich array of experience and expertise on the panel today. So we're very excited to get it started. So just give me a second to adjust my screen, and then we will kick this off. Just a moment. All right, so we want to start with setting the stage. So I'm going to start with you, Jesus. Could you frame for us what we mean by the virtual world? What is our scope here? And along those same lines, how have we seen development in humanitarian projects shifting in their use of technology as a result of the pandemic?
Sure, thank you, Karen. Thank you, everyone else, for inviting me and others to this exciting and important panel. So, I mean, what is the virtual world? I think the way I like to think about the virtual world and doing development and humanitarian in this virtual world is by looking at different sort of layers of applications of technology. I think on the one hand, connectivity, internet, primarily internet connectivity as opposed to mobile connectivity, remains the backbone of every technology application in our work, whether it's internally for the management of our operations and programs, or externally for the use of technology with program participants. After the connectivity, it's digital infrastructure. I think is a very important layer to take into account. And by digital infrastructure, I refer to primarily business and operational support systems that help organizations both in HQ and in the field to be connected, to enable collaborative and learning environments among its staff. So we're looking primarily at what we call the IT backbone systems, whether it's a CRM, whether it's a data warehouse, or systems that allow us to basically share data and learn knowledge management systems, for instance. Then we have a layer that is anything from applications, tools, digital services. This is a layer that is a complete mix of tools and technologies that we're using both within programs for monitoring, evaluation, learning, management. So any tools that everyone is familiar with, such as mobile data collection tools, the information management tools, etc. Then we have tools and technologies that we are purposely trying to integrate to help us achieve certain outcomes within our programs. This could be anything from disseminating information to program participants, enabling cash transfers, digital identities, provision of digital identities, financial inclusion services, crisis mapping, etc., etc. And so this is, as I said, is kind of that complex layer of technology that we either using for improving program efficiencies or to help us deliver certain outcomes. And then a final layer, I would say, is the data layer. I mean, I think this is a layer that I've seen significantly accelerating as a result of COVID, because we've been using more tools. We've been using tools for communication, for collaboration, for learning, and all of these tools are generating more data. And so, although data is not a technology as such, it's the trigger for us to use many data-related tools and technologies that help us make sense of data and information. I mean, so I think it's very important, Karen, that you ask the question of how are we? What is this digital world in which we need to operate, as opposed to basically using digital to operate in a world. I think the world is getting increasingly more digital, and we need to know what are the tools, what is the environment, how is that looking like, but also, what are the policies, what are the guidelines that we need to apply to make sure that we do it and we take advantage of the opportunities responsibly and ethically. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you so much. And you raised a good point. When we were speaking yesterday or the day before in our pre-call, you mentioned that the trajectory of digital acceleration in this past year due to COVID has gone almost as fast as it's gone in the past decade. And that's fascinating. And so that's a nice setup for the next thing we wanted to talk about, which I'd love for Priscilla to respond on, which is this concept of digital acceleration. Again, referring to this trajectory that had started before COVID. It was accelerating the use of digital, use of data, but it rapidly accelerated due to the pandemic. So Priscilla, maybe you could share with us your thoughts on this digital acceleration in our programming context. What are some of the risks and challenges that come with this, and how can we mitigate them?
Thanks, Karen. And I think many of us saw a joke last year that was going around that said, who was the driver of your digital transformation in the organization? And it came with a list of options, and most of us circled, I think, COVID as the accelerator of digital transformation. But on a serious note, going into 2020, many of our organizations were not what we would call digitally mature organizations. A lot of us had the ambition, a lot of us threw the words digital transformation around. But if you look at the research at the time from various reputable bodies, you'll find that it was more of a dream than a reality, and that normally the investments that the leadership were ready to make into the digital transformation journey rarely matched the ambition level that they wanted to truly transform as an organization. So the COVID-19 pandemic forced us to accelerate the delivery of this digital transformation. and at least if not quite transformation in that sense, we adopted a lot more technology tools that have sort of moved us closer to that journey of digital transformation in our work, both internally for productivity and externally in the delivery of programs in communities. This is, in theory, a really, really good thing because of the benefits that technology present in helping us to accelerate the achievement of our results. And this can't be debated, but in reality, there are a few things that we need to be aware of. Actually, not a few. I will mention a few, but I think there are a lot of things that we need to be aware of. I think one of the biggest challenges that I have observed personally is that organizations jumped into this thing without any time to prepare any sort of strategy. There was no thought to it. It was right, let's move, we need to transform. That was necessary, but I think we could have taken a breath, even if it was halfway through the journey, and said, where are we, what are we doing? Digital transformation is not just about the technology tools that we're using, it's about changing the ways we work as well. For example, if we're working in a refugee setting and decide to use more technology tools in the delivery of food items, hypothetically speaking, have we considered what the data protection mechanisms of the technology partners that we're using are? And even more, does the program staff or the program assistant in X refugee camp know that printing out those survey forms that were very nicely collected on some mobile device and then having them lying around on a desk while they have a refugee's first name, last name, age, sex, house number, ward number, tank number in some cases, religion, number of children in the household, age of children in the household, basically summarizing to say you have all the personally identifiable information about this refugee that is probably coming from a very complex context and you're putting them at risk. But having collected the data on some phone using some very nice tool is not enough. The way we work needs to change. Our awareness of the risks and opportunities that are presented need to change. And so that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, is that we jumped into finding the tools. We didn't go into how do we work with this technology. Another challenge is that this transformation carries the risk of leaving the most vulnerable even further behind. If, for example, and this happened, we decided to deliver education content online, those without devices are disadvantaged. And this one is particularly challenging because the things needed to work around it to make sure that everybody has equal access are so many, and we don't yet have the will or the resources to put them in place. Actually, I'll take that back. I think we might have the resources, but we don't have a plan for how we make sure that the regulatory environment in the countries we're working in allow for efficient energy solutions. We don't know how to negotiate low-cost mobile devices, making sure that digital literacy is something that is ubiquitous, and so many other things that make the digital divide even wider the more we move towards technology tools without much thought into how we carry everyone along. And even when you think you have a bit of a makeshift solution of sorts to that challenge, you need to have robust monitoring in place. And the challenge with COVID was that we were not there in person in most cases. I remember pre-COVID starting a project in a refugee camp where we were giving pregnant women a small amount of money to buy some things via mobile money. A lot of the women refugees had just come in, and so they didn't have cell phones, but it was fairly cheap to get them a SIM card, and that became the temporary solution. So what would happen is they'll then go to the mobile money agent, ask to put their SIM card in the agent's phone, and then withdraw the money. But what the agents were doing was that they were not giving the women the full amount of money, and they were sort of almost charging for the use of their phone. And we only found this out much later when field monitors went into the field and then had like some in-depth conversations, and that's when we found it out. But now with the fact that we don't even have field monitors going in, we need to make sure that when we're designing our projects, we have all these sorts of small issues that are easy to miss in mind, and that we use the same technology that we're touting to do more of that monitoring work for us and make sure that we are not missing certain things. It's very hard to do, but it's something that we need to consider. None of us imagined that the agents would be this unscrupulous, but they were. And so designing for those sorts of challenges is really important when you're relying more and more on technology and not on human interventions.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there's the challenge of digital literacy, and not just for communities, but even for our staff in the field, our staff in headquarters, our staff in country offices, making sure that they get the right training, the right support, the right tools to deliver their work. Many of us get very, very excited and end up throwing every tool that we hear about at people. And a risk is also investing so much in these tools that sound exciting and innovative, but simply divert much needed resources from our core mission. I think to wrap up, I would say a clear strategy that is constantly being evaluated and adjusted based on continuous learning is critical to understanding how we take advantage of this digital acceleration, and making sure that we have the right tools, adequately equipping those who are using these tools, and managing the processes and ways of working required for effective and efficient delivery of our programs.
Oh, excellent points, Priscilla. And it just reminds me of the early days with digital. It's so tool-based or tool-driven rather than solution, real need, real design. And I think, we're all keep learning that lesson the hard way, that there are no shortcuts. You can't throw tools at a problem, right? You've got to do good, robust program design with good monitoring, good continuous learning. And I think that's a good setup for the next theme we wanted to talk about, which is the theme of inclusion. You touched on that. And to some extent, the principles around designing programs that use digital at its base, or designing things that we do as programs that have digital at their base. So Claudine, maybe you could reflect for us a bit on what should guide partners' decisions on when to use technology. Maybe taking a step back from that, let's look at the inclusion theme. Like, what have we learned about how technology can include or exclude people as we implement, as we collaborate with each other? How should inclusion be considered to make sure no one's left behind, especially the most vulnerable? And what should guide our decision-making on these themes, especially when using digital might exclude many or cause problems that we're not envisioning? When should we keep it simple and use analog instead? So Claudine, love to get your thoughts on some of these themes.
Thank you, Karen, and Priscilla really set up a great stage for kind of introducing the digital principles. So I think I'll just kind of start at a high level because when we talk about inclusion or deciding what tools to use in specific programs, projects, or contexts, there's really no singular tool or answer to that. It really does depend on from like context to context, from city to city. So asking how you decide that is really really takes like a narrow lens. And the first principle, design with the user. The second principle, understand the ecosystem. Those are really like at the heart of trying to understand what solutions we are trying to bring, why, and to what, to what communities. So to that end, when deciding what tools or approaches we are trying to use, it's really about participation from the communities themselves. So as Priscilla had mentioned, we often get excited. We may, from the outside, see a problem in a community and be like, hey, I have a really interesting solution to that. But we don't know if we're actually addressing a symptom or an actual cause. We don't know if the tool we're introducing is something that the community actually wants or can interface with. So it's really about taking a landscape assessment of, what tools are they familiar with and what do they kind of perceive as the issue itself. And so I do have an example. It's not quite digital related, but when I was at a conference in Tanzania in 2018, I got to sit in on a session and listen to some local individuals talking about their experience with humanitarian and development organizations. And they said, these development practitioners, they came in and wanted to solve a malaria problem. So they gave us nets to put around our bedding. And that was all fine and good, but we already kind of have malaria figured out. We have the medicines and we have our own solutions to that. But they didn't really talk to us about the problems we face. We wanted to, be able to catch more fish to sell in the markets. So we used the nets they gave us, originally intended for malaria prevention, to actually use for fishing. And I thought like that was just like a wonderful example of like, yes, you come with solutions, but you don't actually understand the community and the problems that they are facing. So that said, in terms of just like figuring out what solutions to use, when to go digital versus analog, that's why I say it really depends on the context. Talk to the people that your tool is meant to help, and be ready to accept that it's something that they might not want at the end of the day. They might not even be really interested in going digital. And I think that's really at the heart sometimes of the principles, is kind of understanding when to take a step back, and when digital might just not be the answer for that particular context. So I hope that's not too much of a non-answer, but all that is to say is tech isn't always for everyone.
And Claudine, you work very closely with the principles, and you referred to them, but we just want to make sure all of our participants are aware of the principles for digital development. Maybe just say a quick word. You referred to the first two principles: design with the user, understanding the existing, but just maybe just say what are the digital principles and why these are so valuable from your perspective.
Yeah, so the digital principles, these are 9 guidelines meant for digital development practitioners to keep in mind when they're designing their programs or tools. And I think, these aren't really like hard and fast rules. They're not really a checklist, but they're really to guide your thinking when you're designing these. So you're taking into account the context that you're working in, the other actors that may be working on like similar solutions, so we don't duplicate efforts, especially since, we are working in a field where resources and funding is so scarce. And also, with digital, as Jesus and Priscilla mentioned, we're working with a lot of data, a lot of information, a lot of which can be really sensitive, especially if we're working with marginalized or vulnerable groups. Where does that information go? How is it stored? And do those users actually know how their information is being used, and can they do they have like the right to be forgotten or opt out of these sorts of things? So the principles are like really help you consider these sorts of privacy and security, collaborative and just design efforts to making sure that your tool not only addresses community problems, but they do it in a really inclusive and ethical and responsible way.
Thank you so much, Claudine. And since you've brought up that topic of data security, data privacy, et cetera, I think it would be good to welcome some comments from Jesus, because we were discussing this the other day as well about, as technology and data become more integrated into our work, how can we create that sense of safety and trust, that data will be safeguarded, because that trust is so important in order for staff or community members to participate, right? So maybe you could comment on that idea.
Yes, absolutely, Karen. I mean, I think I wanted to take a step back and then link it back to your question. I think when we were talking earlier with Priscilla about the acceleration, I remember back in 2018 when I joined Mercy Corp, one of the first things that I did was write a technology for development trends, in which I described things, anything from connectivity to drones, distributed ledger technologies, AI, virtual reality, so all of those shiny objects, some of them, and some of the risks and things to take into consideration. Recently, UN OCHA, as recently as April, has published a report that they call From Digital Promise to Action. And again, they look at the trends. The trends are pretty much all the same. I think they specifically mention mobile tools and chatbots as applications. But what is different is that they put a lot more emphasis on the enablers for using those tools, and the policies and the guidelines and the processes and standard operational procedures that organizations are putting in place to make sure that we are truly taking advantage of the opportunities that these technologies have to offer, as opposed to facing the risks. So I think we as civil society organizations, whether we are nonprofits, NGOs, community-based organizations, we are responsible for making sure that both our own staff and the participants in our programs, they have the environment to enjoy these tools and to experience these tools that is the most appropriate and the most secure and the most safe to do so. At the same time, we want to make sure that they can develop the capacities or the capabilities, the attitudes, and they have the behaviors to make sure that they're using this for their own advantage when necessary. So I think all of this is achieved, in my opinion, has nothing to do with the technologies themselves, but really with what do we put in place to make sure that that is done in a safe and an inclusive way. Just as an example, when I only joined IREX in November. Before that, IREX was already working on one of the first sort of guides that they were working as a result of COVID, is this online collaboration guide. It was developed as a result of another initiative called Essential Skills Initiative, which was meant to help program participants, youth, to transition into their livelihoods and to help them basically thrive as they transition to life. They repurposed this guide to develop an online guide to help IREXs or IREX working on in all programs out there, to make sure that they could operate in a virtual world. This was a guide developed with our staff. It wasn't something that we came up with and decided because it's COVID and because we're not going to be using more technologies, now we have to do this. This was something that people asked to be developed. How can we basically navigate this virtual world? How can we be more inclusive of our colleagues and our program participants? And I think doing things like that, really working to enhance that environment and experience, and at the same time build the capacities. Another example is something that we're working right now is a data learning journey that complements another product that we have that we call Data for Leaders, which is supporting our staff and program participants in some cases to make better use of data, which, as I said earlier, I think is one of the, in my opinion, clear accelerations that we've seen as a result of COVID and as a result of using more technologies. So doubling down on all these guides and all these toolkits and that environment, experience, attitudes and behavior is something that I think we need to continue doing, because the technology trends really haven't changed that much. And it's how do we put them into practice that really matters moving forward.
And how do we learn from each other as we do that and don't recreate the wheel, right? So I do want to make sure we protect enough time for Q&A. One of our trademarks as Ideal is making sure we have interactions. So I would like to try to wrap up the panelist part of this and open up the floor for Q&A. But before we wrap it up, maybe Kim, you could comment. Well, actually, I'm taking a step back. Priscilla, maybe you could just very briefly just comment on this idea of online fatigue. Just briefly, what are your thoughts on changes we can make now to address this issue? Because we're all feeling it, even in this conference, right? What are your quick thoughts on that theme?
Very quick thoughts. I think, I don't think there's a silver bullet, and I think it has to be a balance. And it seems that a lot of the responsibility is placed on the individual to be aware and try to manage how much interaction they have in online spaces. But I think this is not necessarily fair. While it is our duty, I think organizations can take a more human-centered design approach to ensuring that we have an environment for individuals to then be able to understand how they can take some time off, how they can, manage their fatigue as they see it coming on while still feeling safe, as Jesus was talking about. So for example, in ActionAid, one of the things we've done in our department is that we've put a stop to Friday meetings. We call it Learning Friday. So we've created space where nobody in the organization is allowed to invite us for meetings. And what we do is we think, we reflect, we learn. You can take a course, you can listen to a podcast, whatever you need to sort of stimulate your creativity, because I think that does help to sort of reduce the fatigue rather than just sitting in meetings and meetings and meetings. And then I also think trying to make sure that as senior leaders, if there are senior leaders in the room, that they don't spend so much time calling everyone into meetings. And what tends to happen is meetings might be part of my job and I'm getting work done, but there's that person that needs to then go and finish a report or finish an Excel document, and they then have to sit on their laptop after hours. And I think one final one would be for me, making sure that we sort of replicate what we did when we're in the office. If I had a question, I walked to your desk, I spoke for 7 minutes, we had a conversation. Now everybody's under pressure to make sure that the meeting is 30 minutes, and then they try to fill that 30 minutes. So can we just cut it down to 7 minutes if we finish discussing what we needed to discuss? And also trying to find different ways of interacting with people. So it doesn't have to always be a long report. It doesn't always have to be an email. Can you do short videos around some of the key strategic points in that 40-page document that you've created? So things like that, I think, help. I could go on and on, but in the interest of time, I'll leave it there. And then if anybody wants to get a hold of me and get some of the things we've done, I'm happy to chat.
Yeah, that's great. So I think while we encourage all of our audience to put some questions or comments or thoughts in the Q&A, we will just give a few minutes to Kim just to kind of wrap us up a bit on the panelist part. And please, we really invite your questions, comments. You've got these incredible panelists. You can throw any question you want at. Please do use the Q&A, but over to you, Kim, for a brief wrap up and thoughts on way forward.
Okay, well, first, thanks for inviting me to participate in the panel. This is really exciting. It was great to hear everybody's ideas on this topic, which I think is a really critical one for the community as a whole. One of the things I did want to point out, and something I think all the speakers have touched on, is that there are some really key aspects to help guide the way forward on this. And it really comes down to looking at all the aspects of digital and data solutions, right? Ensuring that we're careful and really intentional about how we balance the positives and the negatives of those potential solutions, and make sure that we're really addressing the underlying problems. I did want to flag again the digital principles that Claudine mentioned. They can be a really good starting point and provide you a framework for looking at that, but it's really critical. So like, for example, I know everybody's heard blockchain. It's been, topic du jour in the tech world for at least a couple of years now in this space. And blockchain has enormous potential. On the other hand, it also has potential enormous risks. Early on in the Rohingya crisis, there was a lot of discussion about, oh, we're going to create blockchain identities for all of the refugees. Well, creating an immutable identity that identifies somebody's religion and their refugee status, maybe not a great idea. So that's something you might not want to do. On the other hand, there are people now working on blockchain to do solutions to help improve supply chains by handling the transfer of commodities and all the paperwork associated with it, and really has the potential to accelerate how we get commodities to people in need more quickly, right? So they're exact same technology, two different solutions, one of which is a great idea and one of which is not a great idea. And so it's really thinking through that intentionally before we just kind of jump off and start looking at a technical solution. I did also want to flag, so as Jesus and Priscilla mentioned, we really need to be deliberate about this, and thinking about the layers of tech and where we fit into that, right? It may be something as simple as that base layer of connectivity. That may be as far as we can get in a given context. Another place, maybe we can go up to that program level solution. It's going to depend on the context. It's going to depend on really thinking through our interventions and what we're trying to achieve and how that ties together to get a solution that really achieves what our end goals are. Wanted to also mention just the data point, echoing what Jesus mentioned. Data is becoming more and more important. And then also, as other speakers have mentioned, it has the potential to really change the way we work, right? The old days of printing everything out on paper and leaving it accessible, you can't do that in a digital world. But you do have to be just as careful about protecting that data as you did when you locked it up in a filing cabinet. You need to make sure that that data is well protected, because that can have tremendous impact again on program participants' lives if that data isn't protected. And then I guess I just sort of sum up at the end, and we've talked a lot about what some of the challenges are and the things we need to be careful about, but I do want to flag that it's important to really continue to look at digital solutions and innovative solutions and technology solutions, because they have an enormous potential to change the way we work, to make our work more efficient and effective, and to really provide better outcomes for our program participants. We just need to do it in a thoughtful and intentional way.
That's a great summation point. I
Yeah.
mean, that is the message here, right? It's here to stay. It's so many values. We've seen how much value. We need to make the right investments. We need to do it wisely. We need to follow good practice and principles. We need to contribute to the learning, keep building the evidence. Don't shy away from it, but invest in it right. So we've got a great question here from Dan. Thank you so much, Kim. Got a great question here from Dan about what has worked well for vulnerable populations to be financially included better. This includes actually using digital financial platforms for savings, credit, and payment to others. I think, Priscilla, you'd like to answer that question.
I can give it a stab. I don't know if, I think there are a lot of things that have worked well, but I would like to highlight two. One has been a concept of almost digital village banking, where it's self-organizing communities in those vulnerable communities, as we're calling them. And then they sort of find a way to make sure that they support those that might not have access to devices. They pool their resources, and then somebody who's maybe able to use a phone properly is able to then support with administration and so on. Of course, it comes with its own risks, but we won't go into that at the moment, but it's a very good place for savings and making sure that there's accountability, people can trace, the risk of loss is limited rather than keeping it in a box. And I think another one that's really presented great opportunities has been mobile money for those that have even the simple phones. I think that has been really a good one. But for mobile money to work in inclusion, it has to have, there's an element of trust. I remember in the early days of mobile money in Zambia, I did a survey and we were wondering, why is this not picking up? And we thought it would be something like, oh, infrastructure and so on. And when we did a survey in communities, it was simply, this network drops my calls in the middle. Why would I trust them with my money? You know, it was simple things like that, and then making sure that the regulatory environment is also conducive for such things to work in favor of those vulnerable populations. So that would be my quick input. I'm pretty sure the other panelists have some comments.
Would anyone else like to comment from the panel on this question?
Yeah, I would just follow up. I think everything Priscilla said was correct. I think there are approaches you can look at in terms of these digital solutions that can help drive the adoption within environments. So a simple example is not everybody has a cell phone, even in a lot of the environments we work in. But you can look at, okay, maybe you don't have a cell phone, but you may have a community-based phone and everybody can have their own SIM chip. Really easy, they can pop it in, they can protect that. It has their information and only their information, no one else has access to it. But it helps expand that capacity for people to be able to participate into activities like this. And then it's also looking at the context. I used to cover Somalia, and I know it was one of those things that always shocked people. Somalia had, at that point, the largest number of digital money transactions in the world. And people are like, Somalia? And it's because people were really used to using digital transfers to do remittances transfers. And so to them, it made perfect sense that you would get money on your phone. So it was really easy to implement programs that did exactly that for other contexts.
You're on mute, Karen.
I'll just keep going. Thank you for telling me. I said, no, it's a really good reminder that, we have to be mindful of the behavior change, underlying what we're trying to do with these solutions, that we need a robust behavior change approach, because that's what it is. Are there attitudes, are there practices, are there habits, cultural supports that enable people to use these technologies better in some settings than others? And how do we capitalize on that? We are rapidly running out of time, and I'm so sad because I could just talk about this with you guys all day. I know it's a heavy topic for the morning for some of us, for the evening for others, but I really encourage our participants to reach out to our wonderful experts here, Claudine, Priscilla, Kim, Jesus, through the Hoover app, or any way you'd like, if you'd like to engage them on more conversation on these themes. We have a lot of sessions in this event on the themes of virtual. It was a big part of what we'll be looking at during this event this week. So please join those sessions. Let's keep talking about this as a community. Let's keep learning. We're going to, I think, paste the session evaluation now. Is that correct? Should it be in the chat?
It's already in the chat.
It's in the chat. Brilliant. Okay. So panelists, thank you so much for making the time. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate your insights. Thanks, participants, for coming. Please fill out the evaluation. It helps us learn how to better do these sorts of events in the future. And just a quick reminder, in about 2 minutes, we've got some really exciting collaborative sessions coming up. We've got one on practical tools for adapting activities in complex environments, insights from the Sahel, and also destigmatizing remote data collection and remote data quality. So see you at those sessions. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you, bye.
Thank you.